part of healthy self-esteem is treating our time, energy, money, body, and space with value, knowing when and how to set boundaries for what is harmful to us, and not staying in a potentially dangerous situation waiting for others to hurt us or to have concrete proof that they are hurting us before we leave. Additionally, even if a target had healthy self-esteem before getting involved with the manipulator, the odds are that their self-esteem has been damaged in ways they aren't yet aware of. However, by the end of this chapter, you will have a solid start on identifying some key areas that may need some attention. The two basic types of self-esteem. There are two types of self-esteem out there, type 1 and type 2. A person with a type 1 self-esteem expects to be treated with dignity and respect and believes that there is no justification for others to treat them poorly. If another person lashes out at them or treats them poorly in any way, they don't accept justifications for being mistreated. It doesn't matter if the other person had a bad day, a bad childhood, or was frustrated or angry with them. If someone mistreats them, they assert themselves and make their boundaries known. They also expect the other person to be accountable for mistreating them. If this other person continues to mistreat them, then they distance themselves. They value themselves and they don't spend time trying to justify their value to abusers or anyone else who doesn't see it. A person with a type 2 self-esteem justifies being mistreated by others. They often feel taken for granted and unlovable. When others mistreat them, they believe they are to blame and work hard to change their behavior so that the relationship will work. However, all this hard work seems to only yield crumbs of niceness, honesty, or loyalty from others, if that. Deep down, they don't feel lovable, and because of this, they cling to any relationship, no matter how unfulfilling or abusive, because they think this is as good as things can get for them. They confuse their niceness with being boundaryless, and don't understand why they are continually taken for granted when they are so loving, forgiving, and considerate. They frequently have crazy makers and abusers in their life, which only reinforces their low self-esteem and feelings of worthlessness and helplessness. Knowing which type of self-esteem you currently have and have been operating from can be very eye-opening and can go a long way toward setting you free. 3 results of low self-esteem. Number 1, continual self-doubt. If you distrust your judgment and perceptions of people and situations, then odds are you look to others to take the lead on what you should think, feel, or how you should act. This is how people tend to get involved in a series of abusive relationships. They doubt themselves, thinking that any misgivings they have about someone are due to their PTSD or previous relationship with abusers. And then they either ask the abuser or those around them for reassurance. Not being able to trust your perception of others or of events is a problem, especially if the new person is manipulative or abusive. If you are continually unsure and need the validation or direction from others, then odds are one of 2 things will happen. You will either be continually anxious and fearful when it comes to making a decision, or you will have perpetual regret as to why you listened to what someone else thought you should do. You must know yourself to be yourself. Becoming your own counsel and following your own course is vital, as deep down, you know what's best for you. You really do. It's okay to ask for input from others, but it's vital that you are able to ultimately form your own opinion. Learning to validate yourself takes time, but it can be done. It helps to start by making small decisions. Remind yourself that you control the pace and can get distance when you need to. Additionally, it helps to think about someone that you've known for a while and with whom you do feel safe around. Perhaps a trusted sibling or family member, friend, or therapist. Think about how you feel around them, and use this feeling as a reminder that you don't always feel anxious around people. 2, low degree of self-protection. If you are continually placing your safety and sanity last, or can't tell when you are being mistreated or in danger, then this is not only a problem, it's incredibly dangerous. This is especially the case if the other people you are making a priority are manipulative or abusive. All animals have protective instincts and would easily be picked off by predators if they didn't. Humans are no different. Here are some signs that your ability to be self-protective needs work. You can't tell the difference between a safe person and a dangerous person. You are quick to drop any and all boundaries if someone is nice, attractive, friendly, or funny. You trust others completely upon meeting them and think that doing anything less than this means that you have trust issues or are hypervigilant. You look to others to validate your decisions before you take action, no matter how problematic they are or how major the situation is. When you have concerns about someone's behavior, you automatically assume that your instincts are wrong. You then interact with them as though they don't have concerning behavior, giving them the benefit of the doubt until their behavior proves that they are, in fact, untrustworthy or dangerous. You keep abusive or destructive people in your life, thinking that they would never hurt you like they have others, that your relationship with them is special and different. You continually go back to a person who has threatened or harmed you, thinking that your love can fix them. You matter just as much as anyone else. Putting yourself in harm's way to try and save someone who doesn't want to be saved, or worse, who wants to hurt you so that they can feel better about themselves or get their way, is a huge problem that can cost you your life. 3. External locus of control. A locus of control is how and where you attribute the cause of things that happen or don't happen to you. There are two types of locus of control: internal and external. If a person has an external locus of control, they feel that their life is largely directed by things outside of their control, usually other people. This external focus causes a person to become angry, bitter, jaded, defeated, helpless, depressed, anxious, distrusting, and fearful. A person with an internal locus of control is largely self-directed. They understand what they have control over and what they don't. They feel capable of implementing positive change in their life, and as a result, they feel empowered. Shifting to developing an internal locus of control starts with getting in tune with your emotions and discerning what is safe and unsafe, as well as nourishing and draining for you. Once you have a better grasp on these things, it will be easier to develop boundaries, standards, and deal breakers around them. Ask yourself, do you have any of the above personality traits? If so, take a moment to list them and give some examples as to how this has been a problem in your life. Where do you think these personality traits came from? Frequently exploited personality traits. While anyone can be the target of a manipulator, those who tend to get caught up with multiple manipulators generally do so because they have certain personality traits that are impacting their ability to be self-protective, which makes them vulnerable to exploitation. These 4 traits are going with the flow, or people-pleasing, fear of anger, desire to avoid conflict or confrontation, and no solid sense of self. The challenge for those with these certain traits is that because they've always been this way, and because these traits are mistaken by ourselves and others as ideal behavior, it can be difficult to see the problem when it's masking itself as the solution. Additionally, some of these traits may be the foundation for their personality and what's made them successful in certain areas. When low self-esteem is present, a person has these 4 different traits to an extreme. Some of these traits you may not have even been aware of, while others, such as going with the flow and avoidance of conflict or confrontation, may have served you well your whole life, until now. After all, in a healthy context, many of these actions, especially getting along with others, are seen as desirable. However, like anything else, considerate and kind behavior can become problematic if taken to an extreme. This usually happens if a person is putting everyone else first and themselves last. Most of us don't ever take the time to examine our seemingly good behavior because we don't see it as a problem. And most of us tend to think that we have healthy thinking and boundaries until we get a manipulator in our lives who creates so much chaos and confusion that we are confused as to how things got this bad and how we didn't realize what was happening. Here are the 4 personality traits that are frequently exploited. 1. Going with the flow. Being easygoing and working well with others is great to a point. If this personality trait is taken to an extreme of continually pleasing others, then this leads to an imbalance in all of our relationships. Ingratiating ourselves and avoiding confrontation does not make for a healthy relationship. It makes for resentment and a buildup of issues. If we feel a compulsive need to please others, we may feel out of control and frustrated with our life because our actions are limited to what is considered acceptable by others. Perpetually pleasing others causes harm, especially if we are taking care of everyone else at the expense of ourselves. Many people pleasers use niceness as a way to subconsciously protect themselves from being abandoned. Others go with the flow because being nice is a core part of their identity. This is also problematic, as the need to be seen or see yourself as nice can keep you from being assertive. We may find ourselves too nice, passive, to confront or criticize a manipulator, or too nice, in denial, to see their problematic behavior for what it is. Some examples of people pleasing: going along with others to get along with them, saying yes when you mean no, setting a boundary makes you feel guilty or selfish, having no opinion or not knowing how you feel about a person or situation, trying to prove your worth, being willing to change things about yourself, grinding yourself down, turning yourself into an emotional pretzel, physically changing to make others happy, so that others stay in your life or approve of you. Not everyone will like you, and even if they do, they won't approve of everything you are doing all of the time. This is one of the many reasons it's important to know yourself well enough that you can stand firm in your decisions. If you always need others to be okay with your actions, you're going to be waiting a very long time. You need to approve of your own behavior. It can help to realize that of all the people out there, 10% will never like you, 10% will love you, and 80% will fall somewhere in between. Trying to please others, thinking that other people will treat you like you treat them, isn't a good strategy. Using niceness as a way to avoid being abandoned or to keep you safe from harmful people tends to do the exact opposite. It will make you a continual target for hurtful and harmful people. There's nothing wrong with needing some reassurance from time to time, but it becomes a problem when their approval becomes essential to your self-esteem, and the lack of approval causes you to become anxious, unhinged, and in a panic. If you are trying to avoid being left, then you'll have to go to great lengths to keep others around, regardless of how poorly they treat you. However, if you are trying to keep the peace with others so they don't leave, but doing so is at the expense of never disagreeing with them or being able to share what you really think or feel, then you will end up starting a war within yourself. While it's essential to learn how to say no, it's also important to be aware of what you are saying yes to and to the tone that it is setting. For example, you may have no issue with getting your coworkers a cup of coffee, running errands for your boss, or continually letting others decide which restaurant to go to, or meeting someone at their house for a first date. But be aware that what you say yes to sets a tone for how others will perceive and treat you. It may not be right or fair, but it's reality. 2. Fear of anger. Most team-oriented people want peace in their lives. However, there is a difference between resolution of conflict and avoidance of conflict. If a person is attempting to avoid conflict, they may try to avoid anger, aggression, conflict, and confrontation within themselves and with others. These suppressed emotions don't go away. They will resurface in ways that we are comfortable in acknowledging. For example, we may suppress our anger at our spouse, but then that anger surfaces in the form of physical symptoms, such as chronic pain, headaches, or weight gain. Or perhaps it comes out in passive aggressive ways, such as burning their dinner, forgetting to pay bills, or being messy. People pleasers are often uncomfortable with anger, either theirs or someone else's. They may not know how to be angry in an appropriate way, and so they may feel it's safer to bottle up that anger and pretend that everything is fine. We all get frustrated and angry. It's how we handle those emotions that makes all the difference. It's okay for a person to feel how they feel. However, it's not okay for a person to become cruel or hurtful. 3. No solid sense of self. People who have no solid sense of self define themselves through the opinions and approval of others. A person without a solid sense of self is quick to give away their power to others as they think that everyone else knows better than they do, even regarding their major life decisions. If we don't have a solid sense of who we are, then we also don't know our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and core values, and are ripe for manipulation. Alternatively, if we do know who we are, but our identity is limited to only being a healer or caregiver to others, then this is also a problem, as we will continue to not only find the proverbial baby birds with broken wings, but we will also unconsciously seek them out. Many empaths, codependents, and born healers are often very in tune with others and very out of tune with themselves. Their thoughts and feelings are often blurred with others, so much so that they can't tell whose is whose. Having empathy for others doesn't mean that we need to have a lack of boundaries. One of the first steps in developing a solid sense of self is to get reconnected with who you really are. Here are some questions that can start you down the path of better understanding yourself. What are some of your strengths? What are some of your weaknesses? In what ways are you a friend to yourself? In what ways are you an enemy to yourself? When was the last time you had your feelings hurt? What happened? How are you feeling right now, and why? What decision, if any, have you been hesitant to make, and why? How can you tell, physically and emotionally, when you are stressed out? What do you do to manage stress? What are 2 things you've learned about yourself lately? 4. Desire to avoid conflict or confrontation. If 2 people are being open with their thoughts, feelings, and opinions, they will experience conflict from time to time. How that conflict is handled is what determines if this is a solutions and team-oriented dynamic or not. If you are the one who continually gives in or does all of the work to get things back on track, then there is an unequal balance of power, and most likely a one-sided dynamic in more ways than you realize. If both people involved have open, honest, sincere, and solutions-oriented communication, then handling conflict doesn't have to end in a shouting match or the relationship ending. Assertive communication can be used to resolve the conflict. Avoiding conflict or not having any conflicts isn't a sign of a healthy relationship. It's a sign of poor communication. Chapter 25. Boundaries, Standards, and Deal Breakers. Boundaries, standards, and deal breakers are vital to living an authentic life. In combination, they allow us to determine what we let into our life and what we keep out. If we lack any or all of these, we are in harm's way and don't even realize it. Before we dive into the importance of boundaries, it's crucial to understand that attempting to set boundaries with an abusive person can lead to their behavior escalating and becoming very dangerous very fast. Remember, everything is a power struggle with them, and they play to win. Trying to have open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication with a manipulative person doesn't work. and it often makes things worse. Always make your safety a top priority. Err on the side of caution, and don't take any advice from me or others that you feel would put you in harm's way. You know your situation the best. If you are involved with a dangerous person who harms you physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, sexually, socially, or financially, the only boundaries that will keep you safe are physical and emotional distance. Continually trying to explain to them what they've done wrong, why it's wrong, and why it hurt you is as effective as screaming into the wind, and it can put you in serious danger. Remember, you are dealing with a person who is intent on winning, not a person who works as a team. Anyone who purposefully harms you in any way will not respect you or your boundaries. If anything, they will see your boundaries as a challenge for them to conquer. Boundaries. Boundaries are more expansive than saying yes when we mean yes and no when we mean no, although that's a good start. The best definition I've ever heard of boundaries comes from codependency expert Pia Mellody in her book, The Intimacy Factor. She describes boundaries as a form of both containment and regulation to where we are able to express ourselves moderately, as well as are able to filter incoming messages from others in a self-protective way. In other words, our boundaries are a semi-permeable layer, much like a cell wall, that only allows for what is appropriate to enter and exit. When our boundaries are functioning properly, we don't get hurt and we don't hurt others. While healthy boundaries won't protect us from all harm, they do protect us the vast majority of the time. For example, a person with a functional external containment boundary is one who can contain and control their behavior. When they get upset, they are able to restrain themselves from lashing out at others. A person with a functional internal regulation boundary is able to regulate what types of communication and actions they let in from others. If someone were to yell at them or call them names, they would see this abusive anger as a reflection of the other person's issues, not as the truth about them. After all, normal, well-adjusted people don't go around trying to destroy others. If they have their feelings hurt, they make sure to keep those hurt feelings and their self-worth in two different buckets. A great way to tell if your boundaries, standards, and deal breakers need some work is to honestly evaluate your feelings and actions. Have you been feeling resentful or angry towards a particular person? Have you been gossiping, complaining, or venting to others about this person? If you answered yes to either one of these questions, then odds are you've had a boundary crossed or completely violated. When we stew or vent, it's because the issue hasn't been effectively resolved. If the person we are upset with is someone who is willing and able to work towards resolving those issues with us, then an assertive, tactful conversation will most likely be able to get things back on track. If an honest conversation cannot correct this imbalance or only makes it worse, then it's time to go into self-protection mode and limit what we share or how much time we spend around them. Many people are uncomfortable with setting healthy boundaries because they don't want to be rude, or they fear confrontation, rejection, disapproval, or abandonment. They may believe that if they set boundaries with others, this will cause them to miss out on a potentially wonderful person, or that they will be alone forever. These fears often have their roots in childhood and are the result of getting the message that in order to be loved, we have to behave in a way that they see fit. Because who we are isn't good enough, and to be ourselves means to be rejected. The result of not having boundaries is that our relationship dynamics with significant others, family, friends, and coworkers all become one-sided. We silence who we are and lose ourselves to the wants, needs, and opinions of others, looking to them to tell us who we are and how we should think and act. Anyone who disrespects your boundaries will become increasingly problematic for you if they remain a significant part of your life. And if we are turning to a pathological person for validation, then we will see a deeply flawed version of ourselves reflected back at us through their eyes, and we will mistake it for the truth. The consequence of these one-sided, unfulfilling relationships, where we are more focused on pleasing other people than valuing ourselves, is a life full of anger, hurt, and resentment, although it may take many years for us to even realize we feel this way. Setting boundaries is necessary for emotional intimacy to develop with others, and yes, setting boundaries will turn off some people. That's okay. Not everyone you meet is meant to be in your life, let alone in your inner circle. Removing people from your life or moving them to a different circle in your life is often difficult at first, but it's a lot easier than living a life of misery and invalidation with an inner circle full of all the wrong people. This process is significantly easier if we can work towards meeting new people or cultivating nourishing friendships while we are pruning off the old ones. Since everyone's boundaries are different and are in an ever-evolving state, no one knows where another person's boundaries are unless they make them known. For example, we all have different senses of humor in different environments. What one person finds funny, another finds distasteful. If we don't find a certain type of joke funny, it doesn't mean it's because we are too sensitive. It means we don't find certain topics humorous, or we are only okay with certain jokes from certain people. After all, how we joke with a friend is different than how we joke with a stranger on the subway or a coworker that we hardly know. Let's say someone tells a joke we find inappropriate and we don't laugh, or we tell them that we don't find jokes like that funny. If the other person didn't mean to offend us, they will most likely apologize and not tell us jokes like this in the future. If they don't care that they offended us, they don't have respect for our boundary and will most likely try to convince us that their joke is funny, tell us we are too sensitive if we disagree, and then continue to tell us more jokes like this in the future. If we don't have a solid footing in our boundary, we are going to think that they are right about us being too sensitive and not having a good sense of humor, and our self-esteem will take a hit. If we are grounded in our boundary, we will hold our ground and tell them we don't like jokes like this. We won't internalize their comments about us being too serious or uptight because we are comfortable in our boundary. If anything, the more they continue to fight us about our boundary, the more clarity we have that their behavior is disrespectful and immature and doesn't have anything to do with us. They can think whatever they want to think, but because we are okay with our boundary, we don't take their comments to heart, and as a result, our self-esteem stays intact. While others may not know where our boundaries are, it is reasonable to expect another adult to behave in a situationally appropriate and respectful way towards you and others. If someone is being too touchy-feely, rude, deceptive, or abusive, you don't need to stand there and assert yourself until they finally learn they need to treat you with respect. Putting yourself in harm's way like this in order to teach them how to behave appropriately will only serve to frustrate you and annoy them. With people like this, it's best to make your boundary known and then get some distance from them. Keep in mind that manipulators may try to make you feel selfish for setting limits with them, no matter how outrageous, inappropriate, or abusive their behavior is. It's not reasonable or healthy to be expected to be someone's emotional or physical punching bag. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's self-care. Holding our boundaries is a primary way that we cultivate self-respect. It's impossible to simultaneously respect and erase ourselves. Every time we give in to something we don't want, we silence our inner self. When this happens, that inner voice begins to start talking to us. It pushes back and questions why we are allowing this mistreatment. This inner voice isn't the result of low self-esteem or critical parenting, although because it's protesting or arguing with us, it may be mistaken as negative self-talk. This voice isn't your enemy, it's your friend, and it surfaces to warn you when you are unconsciously working to erase it. You can tell the difference between your internal self-critical voice and your internal authentic self voice by what happens when you assert your boundaries. Your internal authentic self voice will quiet down once you start standing up for yourself. and will harbor resentment when you don't. Whereas the negative self-talk that results from low self-esteem or critical parenting doesn't. If anything, the more you try to set boundaries or achieve your goals, the louder and more insulting that voice becomes. For example, let's say you go on a date with someone who is coming on too strong. 10 minutes into the date, you want to leave. But since they planned a whole evening out, you feel obligated to stay, even though your discomfort is growing. If you don't have solid boundaries, you might think any issue you have with their behavior is because you must have issues with commitment or that you are too uptight, giving your date the benefit of the doubt because, according to your internal programming, your boundaries are always wrong. The evening ends with them giving you a kiss you didn't want, but that you gave into because you felt obligated. That night and the next morning, your inner self will be upset with you and start asking why you stayed. If you aren't aware of this internal voice just yet, then it might register as icky feelings for allowing your date to talk to you like they did, or to kiss you at the end of the night. The result of situations like this are that we continually replay or rehash what happened, oftentimes wondering if their behavior was really as problematic as it felt, or if we are the ones with the issue. When we rehash or replay situations, it's usually because we've experienced a boundary violation. The more time you spend around this person and don't make your boundaries known, the more boundary violations will occur, and the more prominent your internal voice and/or feelings of discomfort will get. If you aren't aware that your boundaries have been crossed, you will continue to misidentify any concerns you have with the behavior of others and the harsh internal voice that results. If you aren't aware that your boundaries have been crossed, you will continue to misidentify any concerns you have with the behaviors of others and the harsh internal voice that results as your own unresolved issues. You may mistakenly think that you are uncomfortable around this person because you have commitment issues. If you do realize that your issue with your date is their behavior and stop seeing them, you'll find that voice becomes quiet. When you live your life according to your boundaries and standards, you'll rarely hear that voice. This voice is a lot like the guidance system in a car. If we are going the wrong way, it starts prompting us to make the next U-turn, and that voice doesn't stop until we get back on track. Standards. We all have standards, although most people have never taken the time to examine what their standards really are. If we continually find ourselves in relationships or friendships with people who mistreat us, then this is a sign that it's time we raise our standards for how we expect to be treated. When our standards are healthy, our boundaries will inevitably become stronger, usually without much effort, as your boundaries will always ensure that your standards are being met. You already have a standard in every area of your life. From the quality and quantity of food you eat, to the type of car you drive, to the job you work, to the clothes you wear, and to the people you are friends with and the significant relationships you have. If you are curious to know what your standards are, look at the things you're currently doing. Some examples of healthy and reasonable standards are to be treated with dignity and respect by those in your inner circle, to have emotionally safe people in your inner circle, to have your inner circle and regular environment nourish you. If we want to improve our life, we start by raising our standards. However, we can only raise our standards to the level of our self-worth and self-esteem. If we don't fully believe that we are worthy of being treated with respect, we won't expect it or insist upon it. Instead, if someone treats us poorly, we will either think their mistreatment of us is deserved or justifiable, or we will argue with them about it, trying to get them to see our worth, but we won't make it a deal breaker. Ask yourself, what are my standards for those in my inner circle? What are my standards for those I date? Do I believe that I have value and bring value to others? Do I believe that I'm worthy of having nourishing and supportive people in my life? Deal breakers. Having deal breakers is an important part of healthy boundaries and having a good life. If we don't have any deal breakers, this doesn't mean that we are tolerant or compassionate. It means that our boundaries, standards, and self esteem need work. It's imperative that you develop the self awareness to know the difference between what is nourishing and what is toxic for you so that you can respond accordingly. People with healthy deal breakers think about situations and the behavior of others in terms of what's acceptable according to their healthy standards. People with non existent deal breakers interact with the world based on how much they can handle until they are forced to walk away. Going through life like this is not only hard, it's unnecessary. Your life will profoundly change for the better once you are able to shift your thinking from how much you can tolerate to what you won't tolerate. If we think having deal breakers makes us inflexible or uncaring, then we will stay in situations until they become so outrageously inappropriate and unbearable that we hit our breaking point. By then, our physical health is usually so negatively affected that we struggle with chronic pain, inflammation, insomnia, headaches, rashes, chronic colds, extreme fatigue, and weight gain or loss. Additionally, our emotional health is impacted, and we may now find that we are a nervous wreck, severely depressed, or angry and bitter. In extreme situations, we may have stayed to the point where this other person has become so out of control and dangerous that our life is on the line. Attempting to navigate deal breakers or boundaries in the midst of manipulation is really challenging, as there's so much confusion, mental anguish, and anxiety that's occurring. Your best bet is to stop trying to untangle what all is going on and why, and instead get clear with yourself about where your line in the sand is. What needs to happen in order for you to do something different or to leave? Defining the line now can help you to see it when you get there. As is the case with learning anything new, developing boundaries, standards, and deal breakers will take some trial and error as well as lots of practice. Radical change doesn't happen overnight. However, the good news is that you don't need radical change in order to drastically improve your life. Sometimes a few small changes in the right direction can make a profound difference. Part 4. Winning the Game. Chapter 26. Changing how you interact with the manipulator. Once you realize you've been trying to have a relationship with someone who is playing a game, there are several ways in which you can go about changing the game so that you can restore balance into your life. The first step in this process is to decide how you are going to change the way you interact with them. There are several distancing strategies a person can use: gray rock, low contact, and no contact. Gray rock. If you can't go no contact with a manipulator because you have children with them, or you are somehow unable to get them out of your life for whatever reason, you can implement a technique called gray rock. Gray rock is when you become as unexciting and uninteresting as, well, a gray rock. The goal is to blend into the background and become the most boring, unreactive person they've ever met, so that they lose interest and move on. They only know what you value by the level of your reaction, so beat them at their game and don't react. It helps to practice being indifferent with a trusted friend or in the mirror. Mentally rehearse the various ways they've tried to get you to respond in the past, and then practice staying emotionally neutral. When you must engage with a manipulator, keep the conversation to surface-level topics that you would discuss with a stranger on an elevator. The goal is to avoid sharing anything emotional that is going on with you so that they don't use it against you or respond in a hurtful way. Do not talk about anything that you know will make them jealous or in any way will open the door for them to stir things up and make your life difficult. Do not talk about how great things are going for you or any accomplishments you or your children are having or how great your life is now that they aren't in it. Do not talk about upcoming vacations, people you are dating, recent losses, or painful events you've experienced, or anything that is remotely interesting. Don't try and get them to see how hurtful their behavior was, and is. Remember, miscommunication isn't the issue. If they blame you for everything wrong in the relationship, don't fight them on this. They are never going to see things your way. Doing this takes away their ability to argue and create drama and chaos. Remain polite, professional, brief, and then be gone. Gray rock takes practice and anticipation. You can tell you're seeing their behavior clearly when you are no longer reactive to it. Expect for their behavior to be erratic and dramatic, and it will stop catching you off guard because, of course, they're going to act immature and irrational. It's what they do. Low contact. Low contact is when we have the bare minimum contact necessary with a problematic person. You will know when you have decreased contact to the right amount based on the level of frustration and anger present. If you leave their company and are rehashing conversations with yourself or a friend, then more distance is needed. Remember, you set the pace. For example, this might mean instead of following your mother's wishes that you come home for the holidays and spend 2 weeks with her setting the pace, you decide that you can really only stay for 1 week without losing your mind. If a large amount of mental anguish is still present, then perhaps next time 3 days is your limit. If that's too much, then maybe 1 day, or maybe a few hours. Or maybe you don't go at all and instead call. No contact. No contact is when you have no contact with a dangerous or destructive person. Ideally, not only do you have no communication with them, but you aren't keeping tabs on them, checking their social media, talking to mutual friends about them, and so on. You have nothing to do with them anymore. This is for your sanity, as well as to maintain inner and outer peace in your life. It can help to go no contact if you change your environment and get rid of any triggers that might cause you to slip into nostalgia. Rearrange furniture, put highly emotional items in a box out of sight, or donate them if you're ready, or burn them in a fire pit if you'd like. You may want to tell friends and family that you would appreciate it if they didn't keep you up to date on what your ex is doing, that you are trying to move on with your life. If they argue this point or tell you that you are being immature, then this is a sign that this person isn't supportive, and you may need to get some distance from them. When you go no contact from the manipulator or other people in your life, it helps to have some sort of plan for how you will fill up the void that is left. The website, meetup.com, is a wonderful resource that can help you find things to do as well as to meet new people. If this appeals to you, it can be helpful to join as many meetup groups that you find even remotely interesting. This way, if you are feeling bored or lonely, you'll have a host of healthy activities available. Chapter 27. Changing How You Respond. The previous chapter discussed several different ways you could interact with a problematic person. This chapter covers different ways of responding to them if you are going to keep some degree of communication open. The goal here is for you to shift out of being reactive and into being responsive. Consciously choosing how and when to respond is an important step in setting your boundaries and regaining control over restoring peace in your life. Respond, don't react. If you choose to or must keep in contact with a manipulator, it can help to develop some coping strategies to help you tolerate the stress that will arise. When we cave into them or become reactive, it's generally due to a buildup of tension, being caught off guard, angry, or fearful. Here is an example of what being reactive looks like and how it can backfire. Michelle's ex-boyfriend, whom she has a restraining order against and hasn't heard from in 6 months, sends her a series of text messages calling her names and cussing at her, accusing her of being a selfish, manipulative whore who has ruined his life. She's knocked off guard by this, as she was hoping she'd never hear from him again. Plus, he was the one who was cheating, lying, and being abusive. In an attempt to set the record straight, she defends herself and calls him out on his bad behavior. Multiple texts between them ensue. This scenario ends in one of two ways. Michelle is so upset that she has a hard time regrouping, or her ex slowly moves the fight from blaming her for everything he's done to saying he loves her and she's sucked back into this abusive relationship. If Michelle is going to break the cycle with her ex, she's going to have to shift out of being reactive and into being responsive. I know it's absolutely infuriating to have someone who has hurt you so bad insist that they are the victim of you, especially when they've rewritten reality to do so. However, there's no point in responding to this nonsense, as doing so won't set the record straight. It will just get you back wrestling around in the mud with them, which is exactly what they want. Not responding to someone like this is still a response, and it's the most effective one, as it keeps you safe from further attacks, as well as sends the message that you aren't going to indulge their desire to get into a fight. In instances like this, not responding isn't a sign of weakness or the same thing as giving them the silent treatment. It's a sign of strength, and it's being self-protective. You don't need to engage with crazy makers. If you are in a situation where a response is necessary, for example, you have children or the difficult person involved is family or someone you work with, and you find yourself struggling with what to say, then it might be easier to find a reason to leave the room instead of having to come up with an immediate response. Excusing yourself to the bathroom can be a good strategy, as hopefully they won't follow. This way, you can get some physical distance and regain your composure. Sometimes no response is the best response, but if you need or want to respond, after you are no longer rattled, you can usually send them a letter or an email, or depending on your situation, have your attorney do this. By communicating in writing, you are more likely to avoid saying anything impulsively that you may regret, and it allows you to bring your best, clear-thinking, calmest self to the situation. If you must interact with a manipulator alone, having a phrase or mantra to repeat can help keep you grounded. A mantra that I've found helpful over the years is, "I can handle this." This mantra doesn't mean that we will handle the situation perfectly, but it can give us the confidence we need and to know that we are capable of doing the best we can. It also means that afterwards I can process and recover from the experience with the resources I have available, such as therapy, a support group, journaling, relaxation videos, etc. Set your terms. You will have to teach the manipulator through your interaction or lack of interaction with them as to how you expect to be treated. Depending on the degree of manipulation and level of danger you feel you are in, sometimes it can help to establish clear boundaries and limits. If you feel setting limits might help, then tell them straight out that you will not tolerate the silent treatment, or them threatening to divorce you, fire you, etc. every time they don't get their way or when you assert yourself. If you do stand your ground like this, remember, they will view this as an attack on them. So prepare yourself for their behavior to escalate and for the possibility that they will, for example, fire you or seek a divorce. In many situations, the only way to correct this harmful imbalance which they have established is to leave the job or the relationship. A boundary is only as strong as the consequence you back it up with. If you are fearful that standing up for yourself may make them become violent, then it's time to consider taking steps to get as far away from them as you can in the safest way possible. When changing how you respond to them, it helps to role-play potential interactions with them ahead of time. You can do this by having someone you trust play the role of them while you rehearse the different things that you could say. While you are practicing, make sure to go through some scenarios where they say or do things that would normally knock you off balance, so you can practice standing your ground. While you are practicing your response to them, make sure your vocal tone and body language match with the words you are saying. For example, if they ask you for money and you tell them no, you want your tone to sound like you mean it. You don't want your vocal tone to rise at the end, making it sound as though you are asking them a question or wanting their approval, and you don't want to sound scared or weak. When you are asserting yourself, your body language is also important. Keep your head up, shoulders back, and stand upright. Don't fidget, avoid eye contact, or hunch your shoulders. You want to send the message that you mean what you are saying and that you aren't afraid of them. The more you come across as uncertain, the more they will work to target your emotional soft spots and erode your boundaries. You may be anxious about confrontation, but please be more anxious about the toll this dynamic is currently having on your health. If there is any chance of this dynamic being workable, it will be due to your boundaries, not your lack of them. If the manipulator only wants to continue this relationship if things go their way, there's no real relationship here that's worth saving. Respond on your time schedule, not theirs. One of the more subtle ways that manipulators control the situation is by putting their target on the spot and demanding an immediate response. They will commonly call, text, or email and push for you to get back to them right away. Don't. Even if you have the time, it's important that you break the cycle of them expecting to get what they want when they want it. Unless it is a truly urgent situation, give it some time, at least a few hours or a day, and then respond. How quickly you respond contributes to setting the pace and lets the other person know that they are your top priority at the moment. You don't want to give the manipulator any sense that they have this ability and power over you. Take time to breathe and calm down so you can think clearly. Remember, when you are asserting yourself, you are informing them of your boundary. You are not asking them for permission or for their agreement. It may seem rude, manipulative, or as though you are playing a game if you don't get back to them right away. However, all you are doing is reclaiming your own power in the relationship and sending a message to the manipulator that you are in ownership of your time, not them. If your interactions with the manipulator are in person, for example, if they are a family member or coworker, they may exert pressure through creating a tense atmosphere, not making eye contact, giving you the silent treatment, snickering, whispering, calling you names, crying, sulking, slamming doors, or being hypercritical and fault-finding in an attempt to punish you. When these methods are being used as a means to get you to respond to them and/or do what they want, you will need to hold your ground no matter how emotionally uncomfortable you become. Staying cool, calm, and collected when on the receiving end of anxiety-inducing behavior like this can be a challenge. If you find yourself desperate to do anything to make their behavior stop, ask yourself why this is. A lot of the tension and fear we feel comes from the threat of losing something. Are you afraid to hold your ground because they might end the relationship, get you fired, or cause you to lose clients or friends? Whatever answer you come up with, ask yourself how you would handle things if that were to happen, and come up with a plan to address the worst-case scenario. If you fear losing friends, maybe it's time to start meeting some new people now. If you fear your spouse leaving you, then maybe it would help to seek out a support group, open up a bank account at a different bank in your name only, and spend time cultivating existing or new friendships so you have support if this were to happen. If you fear them firing you, then maybe it's time to put together a resume or to start looking for a new job. Identifying the deeper fear and how you will handle it will empower you to interact with them from a place of strength, not from a place of fear. Interacting with a manipulative adult is a lot like interacting with a manipulative child. If you say no 10 times but then cave in on the 11th, you have just lost all the ground you had previously gained, and then some. The next time you say no or set a boundary, they realize that you can be worn down with time and pressure. And in any future interactions with them, it will be more difficult to hold your ground, but you will have to if things are going to change. Repeat what you've said. Once you've asserted yourself, it's important to stand your ground and repeat only what you told them originally. Do not start discussing, debating, or defending your actions. A great way to remember to avoid doing this is with the acronym JADE, which stands for Justify, Argue, Defend, or Explain. If you do start to jade, they are dragging you off course and into the mud so that they can wrestle around with you. For most manipulators, if they can just get their target into the mud, they consider this a win. You've already said what you need to say. There's no need to keep repeating or arguing the point, and this isn't the time to discuss other issues. You are informing them of how the issue at hand is going to happen according to your boundaries. For example, your ex calls with a question about the time your child's piano recital starts. You give them the time, and then they proceed to become rude, attacking, and demanding, wanting to know if you're going to bring a date, or complaining about how expensive the lessons are and how this is the last month they'll be paying for them, and so on. Don't get pulled into the mud by defending yourself or how important these piano lessons are to your child, or getting upset that they are going to go back on their word to split the cost of the lessons with you. Take a deep breath and stay as non-reactive as possible. Reiterate the time of the piano recital and where it's going to be, and then end the conversation. Disarm the manipulation. One way to disarm manipulation is to address their behavior directly. However, I must warn you that doing so most likely won't go over well and can quickly escalate. This tactic is only to be used with the manipulators out there who are on the annoying or frustrating end of the spectrum, and never with someone violent or that you fear might become violent. For example, say that they give you the silent treatment after you've disagreed with them or asserted yourself. You could tell them that you understand that they are upset, but that giving you the silent treatment is not okay with you. You could let them know that if they need time to cool down, that's fine, but to give you a day or time when they plan on reopening communication. Plan for them to shift the topic back to everything you do that they don't appreciate. Do not engage in defending yourself or getting into an argument. Stick to the topic at hand. So if they start saying something such as, "I don't care that you don't like the silent treatment. I don't like the way you dress," you could counter that with something like, "Well, you have every right to not like how I dress. But for now, I'd like to stay on the topic of the silent treatment and how I'd like for us to communicate in a more effective way." By letting someone know that they have the right to feel the way they do doesn't mean that you're saying that you agree with them. It's simply acknowledging their feelings. These strategies take time and practice, but they are doable. In time, you will find yourself interacting with others in a whole new and empowered way, and you will find it hard to believe there was ever a time you did anything different. Chapter 28. Developing your strategies. You have more insight than you may realize when it comes to developing strategies to interact with the manipulator in your life. What have you tried in the past to prevent yourself from not getting sucked in, flustered, or enraged by their behavior? Have you tried asserting yourself and setting boundaries with them before? Examine what has and hasn't worked. The answers to these questions are the starting point for developing your new plan. The more clarity you have for what does and doesn't work, the more you can anticipate their moves and your counter moves. The best predictor of a manipulator's future behavior is their past behavior. If they have a history of pushing your buttons in a certain way, develop a plan to anticipate that they will continue to push your buttons in a similar way in the future. However, this does not mean that their future behavior won't be worse than their past behavior. It often is. Once you can start to anticipate what they are doing to try and knock you off balance, it won't come as such a shock. If anything, if they don't try and knock you off balance, then this is the time to be shocked. Even if a manipulator starts acting in a caring, concerned, or compassionate way, you would be wise to keep your guard up, as this good behavior isn't the same thing as change and is usually only another level to their game. Opening up to a manipulator in any way, shape, or form and letting your guard down can get you sucked right back in. Keep your emotional shields up and keep contact to a minimum if you must have any contact at all. It can be hard to let go of the fantasy of the relationship you could have, especially when they are on their best behavior or if things have seemed to turn a corner. But remember, there's a difference between a person truly changing and them just acting the part. Now that you know the game you're playing, the players in the game, who is on your team, you're going to need some strategies as to how to actually win this game. Strategy number 1. Stop seeking clarity from the person with whom you feel perpetually confused around. Confusion is always the first sign of a problem, no matter how fleeting that confusion may be. Confusion is a powerful sign that we tend not to give enough credit when we do experience it. If someone has confusing behavior that feels either unsettling or too good to be true, it's a good idea to get some physical and emotional distance from them so that you can think more clearly about how to proceed. One way to do this is to ask yourself if this is a situation that you would want a good friend or your child in. If you would be concerned if a loved one is in this situation, then ask yourself why you think this situation is okay for you. The number one mistake that targets make is that when they feel confused by the manipulator's behavior, they ask the manipulator for clarity. If the manipulator is trying to keep you roped into their game, they won't give you clarity. They will only add more confusion by either telling you what you want to hear or giving you excuses. This will only serve to get you further into their web. To stop seeking clarity from a manipulator can feel counterintuitive for a person who is seeking a solution and thinks that more communication will help. After all, communication should give way to clarity. And this is the case as long as you are dealing with a person who has a team-oriented reality. If you find yourself in a situation where any additional communication on your part only seems to make things worse or adds additional confusion, there is something wrong, especially if you don't have this issue with other people in your life. Strategy number 2. Anticipate nostalgia, minimization, and well-intended bad advice. The ending of any relationship can be difficult, no matter how toxic the dynamic is or how angry you are with them. If the manipulative person in your life is a parent or partner, it can be difficult to give up the fantasy of the relationship you wanted to have with them. The pull of this fantasy can be hard to resist, and it's the main reason why people continue to go back. In order to prevent this pull, it can help to anticipate craving the fantasy and for nostalgia to kick in so that you can prepare yourself if and when this happens. One of the ways to do this is to write out all of the reasons this relationship isn't good for you. If you have screenshots of terrible things they've said, keep those. If and when you are tempted to reopen contact with them, read your list and look at your screenshots. The goal here is to remind yourself of the pain that comes from having them in your life. Don't slip into minimizing their behavior or thinking that maybe you could be friends or casual acquaintances with them, especially when their track record is that they have caused you a lot of pain and shown no lasting signs of change. Holding on to hope in a dynamic like this isn't being optimistic, it's being in denial. Strategy number 3. Understand that there is always an angle. Manipulators seek to get their way at the expense of others, while malignant manipulators seek to get their way at the destruction of others. It's how they interact with the world and go about getting their needs and hidden agendas met. Everything is a game to them, and every move they make has a purpose, even if their move seems harmless or even considerate. For example, your ex offers to take you and your children to lunch so that they can apologize for their hurtful and insensitive, abusive behavior. They bring small gifts for the children, apologize to you, and the rest of the lunch goes smoothly, ideally even. You didn't know that they were capable of such appropriate conversation or thoughtfulness. They even go so far as to video the lunch, with everyone smiling and laughing. You think this is a little odd, but chalk their behavior up to them being excited to see the kids. Lunch ends with them promising to call that night to say goodnight to the kids. You leave thinking that maybe they finally understand how hurtful their behavior has been and hopeful that they will be a more involved parent from here on out. But that night they don't call, and you have 2 children to console. You fire off several angry texts to your ex about what a jerk they are and that you're tired of them being such an awful parent and that your kids deserve better. Several days later, you find out that they've posted the video of your lunch visit on social media, along with some screenshots of the angry texts you'd later sent, painting the picture that they want to be a doting and involved father, but because of your abusive and controlling behavior, you won't let them. Your jaw drops, and you sit frozen in stunned disbelief. Once the shock wears off, you start to realize just how damaging and manipulative their post really is. Mutual friends, family, former coworkers, and people at your church all begin commenting on it, showing support for your ex. You are mortified as you start to realize lunch and a promise to call the kids was all a ploy to make you look bad. You call your best friend upset and in a panic, trying to explain that you were set up. Realizing how paranoid and emotionally unhinged you sound, you end the conversation unsure of what to do or how to do damage control. The example above isn't extreme, and unfortunately, some version of this setup is common with manipulators. The lesson to learn here is to treat each and every interaction with them as if you'd have to defend your actions to a judge. You want to stay in control, and by staying ahead of their games as much as possible in order to avoid being in a one-down position and having to scramble and do damage control. The only way to stay in control is to keep your guard up and assume that everything they do has some sort of angle. If their previous behavior has shown that they are manipulative, do not let a few seemingly considerate acts paint a new picture of them. This isn't you being paranoid. This is you being protective. As the saying goes, you aren't being paranoid if they really are out to get you. Strategy number 4, getting a witness to your reality. Document every communication possible in order to create a paper trail, and view your every response as though you'd have to explain yourself to a judge. Additionally, you would be wise to assume that they are doing the same thing, so be mindful of what you say and how you say it. Even if no legal actions are ever taken, keeping a written trail of all of the crazy making can help to validate your experience. Chapter 29, Practicing Your Strategies. By this point in the book, you are seeing your behavior and the behavior of others in a whole new way. While the thought of changing how you interact with the manipulator may feel overwhelming, with practice and time, the skills you are learning will become second nature, and there will come a day when you won't believe you ever interacted with people differently. So here are some ways to set yourself up for success. Prepare and practice to be knocked off balance. One of the biggest shifts that we can make in disabling manipulative behavior is to expect for them to do and say things to knock you off balance, and to have a pre-planned response for what you will say or do ahead of time. Prepare and practice how you can keep your distance from them. If you have downtime around them and want to avoid conversation, you could, for example, plan to stay busy returning emails, texting a friend, or using some headphones to listen to music. Prepare and practice some responses ahead of time. Mentally rehearse what you could say in order to excuse yourself from the situation, or as a response to being backed into a corner. For example, if you know going to your parents' house for the holidays will result in them shaming or ridiculing you, either limit your time there or make alternate plans if possible. You'll know the right level of distance you need based on how calm or agitated you feel. The more agitated you are, the more your plan needs some revision. Prepare to need support. Lining up some support before and ideally after you know you will encounter a problematic person or a difficult event, such as a court date, birthday party, holiday, etc., can help to relieve some of your stress. For example, you could speak to a good friend or therapist before and or after the anxiety-inducing experience to help you prepare for it as well as to decompress from it. However, while getting support can be tremendously helpful, it's not a substitute for taking corrective action where you can. It's only relieving the stress you have in the moment. For example, it's common for targets to struggle with shifting out of hoping and coping and to start being assertive and setting boundaries, assuming that doing so is safe. What tends to happen is that they get into therapy or a support group and vent for months or years on end, thinking that this is being productive without actually doing anything different. For what it's worth, I did this for decades before I realized if I wanted to restore peace in my life, I was going to have to set limits with other people. Conclusion. If you are like most people, myself included, who are drawn to this topic, your initial goal was to better understand a specific problematic person in your life. What you may not have anticipated was that understanding manipulative behavior leads to a series of rabbit holes to explore, each one leading to more clarity and more unanswered questions. This might leave you feeling disoriented and confused, much like Alice in Wonderland, with your understanding of the world flipped upside down with each new rabbit hole. Feeling this way is normal and is all part of the process of massive personal growth. With time and observation, I've come to realize that there are 4 big rabbit holes of awareness that are necessary to see the behavior of others and ourselves more clearly. However, the challenge is that each of these rabbit holes can contribute to a tremendous amount of self-doubt and anxiety and cause a person to stop moving forward or to run back to what they know. At this point in the book, you are, at a minimum, in the process of going down that first rabbit hole. Understanding the first rabbit hole. The first rabbit hole is understanding that many of the messages we've been given about love, friendship, commitment, how to solve problems, and how to spot problematic people are incomplete at best and incorrect at worst. This can be terrifying, and for those who are deeply wounded by a pathological person, this can lead to a burning, almost obsessive desire to understand personality disorders, especially narcissistic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorder. This search often leads to many hours comparing and contrasting information, trying to figure out exactly what kind of personality disorder the problematic person in their life might have, or if this person is just a normal crazy maker with relationship-destroying behavior who is eroding your boundaries. The main focus people in this phase tend to have is with trying to discern the difference between normal and deeply problematic behavior. It's around this point that they get caught up in well-intended bad advice and frequently second-guess what they are considering problematic, as they are still holding on to the fears of missing out on a good person and being too uncompromising with the boundaries and standards they are developing. Understanding that there are people in this world who are so profoundly destructive is really confusing, and it can feel that the only way we can keep ourselves safe is by understanding what we are up against. However, it's important to realize that this problematic person in your life is more than likely not the first, and they won't be the last. It's vital that you are able to extend your understanding of all of the information, how you perceive behavior in general, and not limit your understanding to the problematic person in your life. The challenge with this is that you start to see problematic behavior everywhere, but you are the only one who sees it. Other people in your life are quick to deny, minimize, or excuse it, and this might make you question whether you are being hypervigilant or if what you are seeing is in fact a problem. The odds are that what you are seeing is a problem, and you aren't making a big deal out of nothing or being hypervigilant. Unfortunately, we live in a dysfunctional society, and nothing in this book is common knowledge or taught, at least not to the extent it needs to be. The biggest challenges with the first rabbit hole. To begin to find your voice again. It might help to start small and get in tune with your wants, needs, and opinions, even if you don't act on them, don't think you have any, or they aren't that strong. For example, your friend asks you where you want to go to lunch and you have no preference. Even if you don't care if you have Chinese food or pizza, the goal here is to make a decision and to assert yourself, so pick one. You could also go window shopping or go through your closet and ask yourself what you do and don't like and why. And yes, little decisions and opinions like this do make a difference, especially if you make it a point to make them on a regular basis. You will be surprised as to the level of self awareness this simple exercise will bring you in the next 6 or so months. To begin to turn inward for answers instead of asking others, especially if you are traumatized or have PTSD. Practice getting clear on what you do think and why, even if you doubt your answers. At a minimum, come up with your own opinion and supporting reasons why before you seek validation from someone else. You may also want to journal about this so that you can go back with the benefit of hindsight and see how these different decisions played out and why, and examine how close they were to your perception of events. To get in tune with when you are being mistreated. Now that you know a lot more about manipulation and abuse, as well as problematic behavior in general, you will start to become aware of when you and others are being treated with disdain, contempt, or hostility. You may start seeing this behavior a lot more frequently and wonder if you're being hypervigilant. Odds are you aren't, because there is no shortage of this kind of behavior out there, and it can be really unsettling when you start to see it for what it is. To understand learning about manipulation and the various types of manipulative people is only the beginning. If there is one point that trips people up and gets them stuck, it's this one. Learning about manipulation techniques, abuse, narcissists, sociopaths, and other types of manipulators is extremely helpful and can go a long way to keep you safe. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The magic happens when we start to examine the various ways we were socialized in not protecting ourselves in the first place, and are able to begin correcting this deficit by learning what it means to value ourselves. To realize that your healing doesn't end here. Healing from manipulation and the emotional devastation that comes with this doesn't mean going back to the way you were, and it doesn't mean no longer feeling suicidal or being able to cope with the pain. It means understanding the world and yourself in a new and empowering way, creating a new normal for yourself, and working through your feelings along the way. Understanding the second rabbit hole. The second rabbit hole people go down is when they realize whatever relationship brought them to a book like this isn't the first problematic relationship they've had in their life. The one that brought them here might have been the most painful or the most over-the-top, bizarre thing you've ever experienced, but odds are it wasn't the only one. This realization takes most people years to have, and I hope that by pointing it out to you, you can begin connecting the dots sooner rather than later. It's worth taking the time to list out the various problematic dynamics you've had in your life and to explore what these relationships had in common. The biggest challenges with the second rabbit hole. To make the connections between these different relationships. Every problematic dynamic in your past is most likely different. Some might have been crazy-making, and some might have been scary or even dangerous. Some might have been with friends, family members, significant others, coworkers, neighbors, or people at your church or place of worship. To make the correct connections between these different relationships. It's easy to link an incorrect cause and effect and to think that people that caused you pain did so because they were men or that they had a certain astrological sign or some other defining feature. It is essential to realize that problematic behavior is the problem. All these other factors are not the issue. To continue to validate yourself. As you start connecting the dots, you will most likely come across other people who will tell you that you are hypervigilant and making a big deal out of nothing. The more you understand covert and overt forms of manipulation and abuse, the easier it will be for you to understand and validate your experience. To not try to force others into seeing problematic behavior for what it is. Most people are in deep denial and don't want to face the facts that someone is abusive or manipulative, especially if that person is a family member. To move from knowing when you are being mistreated to getting in tune with what is comfortable and uncomfortable for you. Once you start to get in tune with what it feels like when you are being mistreated, the next step is to get in tune with what uncomfortable situations or behavior feels like when it starts. The next step in this process is to begin navigating boundaries in situations like these, regardless of what anyone else thinks of the situation or what you should do. Understanding the third rabbit hole. The third rabbit hole involves an even further expansion of awareness. Now you are starting to see problematic behavior in society. You begin to see the problematic messages that are circulated and seen as either harmless or as truth. Certain themes in movies, especially romantic comedies, music lyrics, and TV shows may leave you with feelings of disgust and concern that stalking, abuse, and control are mistaken as romantic. I have some videos on my website that address this in more detail if you're interested. You can find them at www.thriveafterabuse.com/movies. You may find certain messages or advice from your spiritual leader, counselor, or best friend lacking the context of healthy boundaries. You start to become more aware of the patterns you were in before and are better able to slow them down and do something more balanced and empowering for everyone involved. Your inner circles start to shift, and you begin to seek out people who have a healthier understanding of boundaries, both of yours and of their own, to where dignity and respect are freely given and not something you need to fight or beg for. Around this time, you find it difficult and uncomfortable to be around emotionally immature and manipulative people and the various crazy-making conversations that result. Additionally, outside of feeling frustrated, you may find that you are starting to notice physical symptoms that arise when you are around toxic behaviors and situations, as though you literally feel the toxicity and it's making you sick. You might notice headaches, fatigue, an upset stomach, or your skin might start breaking out. Because your discomfort continues to grow, setting boundaries and getting the distance you need becomes significantly easier. The biggest challenges with the third rabbit hole. Feeling like you don't belong. You start seeing concerning behavior more frequently, and yet other people don't seem to notice. This can make you feel like an outsider when you are around other people who have no issue being around certain family members or problematic people. Self-doubt. Even though you are getting better at validating yourself, you may still struggle with wondering if your standards and boundaries are too high, especially if you are feeling lonely. At this stage, you are relating to people in a very different way, and you may find that even if you do try and lower your standards, doing so is painful because you are craving the company of empowering, nourishing people who are in tune with who they are. Reshuffling your inner circle. You may find that you are wanting or needing to distance yourself from quite a few people. There may come a point when you realize that while your circle is healthier, it's a lot smaller than you'd like it to be. A great way to meet new people is with the website meetup.com, and the best thing is that you can meet people based on certain interests, such as personal growth or whatever hobbies may interest you. Understanding the fourth rabbit hole. The fourth rabbit hole is seeing your own problematic thoughts and behavior. Perhaps this was behavior that you developed as a way to cope around dysfunctional people. Or maybe it was the result of dysfunctional messages about who you are and who you should be. This awareness comes into focus a little at a time, and if we are introspective and dedicated to personal growth, it's something that will be a lifelong process. This doesn't mean that we are deeply flawed and must sit on the bench of life and wait until we are fully healed and self-aware before we date, cultivate friendships, or even simply have fun. It simply means that we, like all of the other people out there who are interested in self-development, are striving towards self-actualization, and that this is a journey. The best thing about the fourth rabbit hole is that you will start to come across other fellow travelers who are like-minded, people that you always hoped existed but never knew where to find them. The biggest challenge with the fourth rabbit hole. being open to exploring dysfunctional messages you've unknowingly received. This is the biggest hurdle for people, myself included, in part because we don't know what dysfunctional messages we've received because we view them as truth. And in part, it can feel like victim blaming to even insinuate that our social programming could have played a part in us being hurt. This is especially the case if our worldview has never caused us harm before, or for many helpers of the world, being kind, compassionate, forgiving, and tolerant can seem virtuous and nowhere near the zip code of problematic. For many of us, these traits are taken to an extreme and consequently imbalanced, causing us harm in ways we most likely aren't consciously aware of. When this is the case, these damaging relationships can seem like a fluke, and that had we known about these kinds of people, we wouldn't have gotten tangled up with them. This is only half correct. If these traits remain imbalanced and our vulnerabilities remain unexplored, we will continue to run the risk of getting caught up with problematic people. Additionally, it takes most people years before they've been able to process enough of the hurt and anger to even be open to the idea of exploring their vulnerabilities and any problematic messages they may have about love, friendship, commitment, boundaries, and forgiveness if they ever get to that point. It's important to realize that this imbalance isn't just with you. Society is dysfunctional, and the messages we are all taught lack the context of what it means to be self-protective. Instead, most people are taught the opposite, that being a good person means to sink ourselves to save others. Many people get consumed by this pain and as a result feel broken and become bitter and jaded. If this describes where you currently are, please know that this is a normal stage in healing and that you don't have to get stuck here. It can help to view yourself as badly bruised and forever changed, but the bruises can heal, and the ways you've been changed don't have to be all for the worst. With time, many survivors are able to squeeze out dozens of lessons from these experiences and not only rebuild a better life for themselves despite what happened, but rebuild a better life because of what happened. In fact, the only people I've come across who fully have the awareness needed to effectively see manipulation for what it is, disable it when it occurs, and equate loving themselves with being self-protective are those who have had their lives blown apart by problematic people and who have consequently been able to go down each of these 4 rabbit holes in this section. The reason is that we often need total destruction in order to not only rebuild, but to consciously rebuild, examining every piece to make sure it's a good fit. So please don't make the mistake of looking around at others who haven't had their world destroyed and think that everyone else has it all figured out or is healthy or well-adjusted. I've encountered many mental health clinicians and relationship experts who have this same dysfunctional programming and don't realize it. You can tell where someone's worldview is based upon how they speak about the various topics I mentioned before: relationships, love, commitment, friendship, boundaries, etc. A person who has dysfunctional messages that are running their behavior has unhealthy understandings of some or all of these things. In my book, Out of the Fog, I cover several dozen frequently confused concepts that occur when a healthy context is missing, such as a person being friendly and a person being a friend, a predator and a parent, a manipulationship and a relationship, trauma bonds and healthy bonds, tolerating abuse and a person not being perfect, sincerity and intensity, selfishness and self-love, deal breakers and workable behavior, a person acting the part and them actually changing. In order for our lives to work, balance must be restored and continually tended to. The only way this is possible is to know how to be self-protective and value our time, energy, emotions, body, and environment around us, as well as to be able to discern the differences between healthy messages and dysfunctional ones. Many of these dysfunctional messages and their functional counterpart have been addressed in this book. They include understanding the two different mindsets, Chapter 7, understanding your vulnerabilities, Chapter 24, understanding healthy boundaries, standards, deal breakers, Chapter 26, understanding common personality traits that are exploited, Chapter 25, understanding what type of self-esteem you have, Chapter 25, understanding the problem with needing external validation, Chapter 25, understanding what type of locus of control you have, Chapter 25, understanding the stages of change and where another person is within these stages, where your expectations for them are, and where your own behavior is in response to them, Chapters 17 and 18. The journey through healing isn't something that you have to go on alone. Tens of thousands of people across the world are in our support groups as I type this. We were once afraid, overwhelmed, lonely, resentful, and felt broken beyond repair. Many thought that they would never smile or feel joy again. Through the validation, understanding, knowledge, and support of others who have been through this, we've been able to restore peace and balance to our lives. So please come and join us at www.thriveafterabuse.com. This has been the Narcissist's Playbook: how to identify, disarm, and protect yourself from narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, and other types of manipulative and abusive people. Written and narrated by Dana Morningstar. Copyright 2019 by Morningstar Media.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Here's a recommended preview based on your listening. To listen to the full title, you can buy it in your player.
This is Audible.
Out of